So hi everyone, I'm Resha. I'm part of Rise in Ireland, and I've been proposed to chair today's meeting. So um, if anyone has any objections, speak now or forever hold your silence. But I'm very excited. I feel like I'm a pretty neutral party here because I know very little about UK politics. So I'm very intrigued to hear all about this. Um, I just want to tell kind of people who might be unfamiliar with some of the organizing of this meeting about who's actually behind it. So this meeting is kind of co-organized by three different small Marxist groups. So as I mentioned, I'm part of Rise in Ireland, and also Reform and Revolution in the US and Learn and Camp from Germany. So just want to give you like the tiny little bit of info about these groups before we dive in. So first, just to mention that all three of us work as kind of Marxist wings in broader left projects. So in Ireland, you might be familiar with People Before Profit. In the US, it's the DSA, and in Germany, it's Die Linke. And I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But so the point is that we don't think that the task of Marxists is to kind of build isolated sects, but to build a revolutionary socialist wing within kind of existing movements. So we believe that this type of mass work or united front work is really important for socialists to be able to work with others to build genuine mass movements, and ensuring that within these existing movements that we push socialist and Marxist ideas. And the second point to raise is that all of these groups put an emphasis on the need for democratic organization. So we reject the bureaucratic centralism that is kind of a feature of a lot of revolutionary left organizations, but strongly believe, and it's kind of a feature maybe of this meeting as well, that it's through discussion and debate and having members involved in the decision-making process that we can kind of develop the Marxist organizers that we need. And then the last point to emphasize is that we're eco-socialists. So we believe that the climate crisis is at the center, and it is a crisis of capitalism and kind of the biggest issue that we face at the moment. So that means as eco-socialists that the environmental movement, we argue that the environmental movement must be socialist, but also that the socialist movement must be environmental. So if you are not already a member of these groups, I would kind of encourage you to look into the one that's maybe closest geographically or that you're interested in. Maybe if people want to post links in the chat. So that's about the kind of the group. Just to tell you a little bit about tonight's meeting. So originally this was kind of planned mainly to discuss the protests and the strikes that are happening in England and Scotland and Wales, including the Don't Pay and Enough is Enough campaigns. And we're definitely excited to hear more about that from Dave. But as many of you will be familiar, it's been a very eventful last few days. So I'm sure we're going to want to talk about that as well. But I will hand over to Dave in a minute to give us an introduction about kind of what's going on, and especially related to what socialists are doing. So Dave will have 30 minutes to introduce because there is a lot to cover, and then we'll open it up to discussions and contributions from everyone, and really want to encourage other people who might have firsthand experience in excuse me, in what's going on across the UK to share your experience and to add to the discussion. Before I officially introduce Dave, I also just want to flag that the meeting is going to be recorded. If you would like to contribute but don't want to be recorded, that's fine too. You can just indicate in the chat or send a message or something, or just say at the start of your contribution. So finally, just to introduce Dave officially. So Dave Hill is a revolutionary socialist, a member of the anti-capitalist resistance, as well as the Labour Left Alliance in Brighton and Hove. He was active in the Labour Party in the 80s and again involved in Labour during the Corbyn movement. And I believe he will speak to us today about the perspectives for Britain and the left, and hopefully answer some questions from the floor. So Dave, over to you, and I will interrupt you as requested to give a time heads up.
Stop me halfway through as well, because I want to finish what I want to say. Okay, evening, comrades, or morning, or late night, wherever you are. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be here. Hope this is useful. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I've been involved in left politics since I was 16 years old. In all my life, in all my political life, I've never seen events like this. There is a word in English. I'm not going to swear in this program, but there is a word, clusterfuck. And it just means when everything goes wrong, when everything collapses and there's complete chaos. Well, a lot of the British press are not using the word clusterfuck. They're using the word trusterfuck about the late lamented Conservative Prime Minister. And every day we wake up and we're turning on the news to see who's the latest Home Secretary, Minister of the Interior, who's the latest Prime Minister, who's the latest. So we have not seen such times as this. And that has many dimensions. And our task is what I want to talk about, what I want to end up by talking about. Our task as revolutionary, anti-capitalist socialists who want to replace capitalism by democratic socialism and Marxism. So I want to ask three questions. The first question is, and I think it's a pretty useful questions. First question is, where are we now? Where are we now? Second question, where do we want to get to? And the third question is, how do we get there? Pretty important questions. Where are we now? Where do we want to get to? Where are we now? In summary, and I'll give some detail, but in summary, we are seeing an intensification of class conflict, an increase in class awareness, an increase in awareness of what Gramsci called the monsters. I mean, Gramsci's got a wonderful quote. The crisis, this current crisis, consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. I mean, you could talk about Boris Johnson as a morbid symptom. The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters. And what monsters? Recently, we've had the scenes of the Conservative hopefuls to become the next Prime Minister. Liz Truss won it. What a collection of grotesque, upper-class and self-entitled, anti-working class, vicious representatives of their class and of capital. In the States, I think a famous book is by Ayn Rand, R-A-N-D, Ayn Rand. I looked at her work and I always thought that what was it called? Atlas Unchained or Atlas Unhinged or something. Atlas Unchained, I think. And I looked at that and I thought, this is economic Nazism. This is confining people to what Engels called social murder. The deliberate, the ruling class perfectly happy to see the poor and the workers die as soon as they've outlived their working life. And so we live in such a time of monsters. There's a couple of other important developments, and the ruling class is frightened of this in different countries. It's not just Britain, of course. I mean, there's massive movements in France and in many countries around the world. But the ruling class is frightened of what they call social explosion. And we have to be there, comrades. We have to be there. And at the end of in the final third, how do we get there? I want to suggest, and there'll be wide agreement and wide disagreement about how we get there. The other aspect, or two other aspects, in technical terms, the rate of exploitation of the working class is increasing. There's been intensification of the extraction of surplus value from the labour power of workers. In other words, people are having to work harder to live, to heat their homes, and to eat. And now, in this current crisis, and it won't get better under this under capitalism, under this current crisis, then people cannot afford, there are millions who cannot afford to heat and eat. And I'll just tell you, I'm only going to tell you one anecdote, but there's a story this is a story about poverty, and I grew up in poverty. I've had a decent living, very, very good living as a activist, a trade union representative, political representative, lecturer, professor, etc. I've had a good life, but I was born in a poor family, and I grew up. I know what poverty is like, but not the poverty that the poor in Britain are now facing. And there was a kid at school, and teachers noticed that every day he was taking a few sachets of tomato ketchup, red tomato sauce. Every day he was taking a few sachets from the school dinners. He was on free school meals. Not enough kids are. And one of the teachers said, well, why are you taking those sachets home? He said, it's so we can have tomato soup at night, me and my brothers. And that's poverty. That's poverty. And growing up in the 60s, 50s and 60s and 70s, as I did, I thought we'd never see those days come back. So that's part of the context. I mentioned Ayn Rand, and of course, I say of course, but Liz Truss co-wrote a similar book called Britannia Unchained. And we saw the results. Britannia Unchained, extreme small state neoliberalism. And we saw the effect on the markets. The bigger context within British capitalism is that British capitalism is in more of a crisis than many other capitalisms. I mean, Britain had an empire between Elizabeth I and Elizabeth II. The empire's gone. Britain has left Europe. That's a whole other debate, which might arise during the discussion. But currently, Britain is a small island off the coast of northwest Europe, cut adrift with one of the lowest productivities globally. What we saw was, I think one of my comrades in England used a lovely phrase, soft coup. It's a soft coup by finance capital. The destruction of not destruction, but the damage inflicted on the ability of Britain to borrow money and raise money. Now I've just got something else on my, something popped up on my screen. Internationally and nationally, we're also seeing what Althusser described as the intensification of the ideological and repressive state apparatuses. Now, I haven't got time, but we in all of our countries can give examples of the way the state is preparing for possibly a violent class war, the way they are passing laws in England, restricting the right to protest, restricting trade union rights, making it almost impossible to go on strike. Just one, there's been a recent law passed in April or June this year. Do you know, in England, under the new law, it is illegal to have a protest, march, demonstration, even of one person, if the police consider it, wait for it, too noisy. What the hell is the point of a demonstration? Or if it inconveniences, etc. So the repressive state apparatuses are being geared up far more. They've always been there, of course. The law, the anti-working class laws, always been there. But in many, many countries, we're seeing the ratcheting up the preparation by the ruling class for a much more violent class war. I want to look at left forces in Britain. And by left forces, I don't include the Labour Party. Now, look, I was in the Labour Party. I joined it on my 16th birthday. I was in it. I fought numerous elections in it for Parliament. I became leader of a local group, leader of councillors on a county council, etc. I've got a long history in the Labour Party for last 40 years as a revolutionary Marxist. But it's changed. It has changed irrevocably. And some comrades, there is a debate on the English Marxist left. I'm with comrades like Roger Silverman and Richard Brenner and Nick Rack. There's no hope. There is now no hope of rescuing, from a left-wing perspective, the Labour Party. Yeah, sure, there have been expulsions in the past. I remember when people were expelled, actually, when I was a boy, in the 50s. I remember when Militant was expelled in the 80s. But this set of expulsions, this set of gripping the Labour Party, gripping it so that it is safe for capitalism, this process has gone far further. And I'll just give you one example. In 1918, the Labour Party adopted the famous Clause 4 to secure by workers of hand and by brain the full fruits of their labour and the distribution thereof. A socialist clause. When I was a teenager, Hugh Gaitskell, Labour leader, tried to get rid of that. He was crushed by the rank and file rebellion in the Labour Party, got nowhere. 1994, speed forward to Blair, he got rid of Clause 4 with very little problem within his first weeks of office to make the Labour Party. And Blair, they're not Blair, and Starmer has gone so much further. My God, me and my comrades, who some still in the Labour Party, some still think it is a good idea to stay in the Labour Party. And of course, we make links with them and we work with them. But we looked at the recent Labour Party conference, Keir Starmer wrapping himself in the Union Jack, singing the national anthem. I've been to about 15 different Labour Party conferences. These are completely new. And you no doubt read about these things, the expulsions on false grounds of anti-Semitism of many comrades, including many of my personal friends, people I've worked with for decades. The right-wing grip on the Labour Party is stronger than it has ever been. So that's Labour. Look at the way Labour, the capitalist class and the right wing of the Labour Party got rid of Jeremy Corbyn, who was not even a Marxist, not even close to it. Jeremy Corbyn, it was a classic left social democrat. Classic left social democrat. Very good, very good policies. And we Marxists, as Marx approved, as Lenin approved, as Trotsky approved, of course, and Gramsci approved, of course, we support reforms. But unlike Corbyn and unlike Bernie Sanders, we don't just want regulation capitalism to make capitalism work a bit more nicely. We want to replace it. And there's no hope of that now inside the Labour Party. Right, now let me go over some of the other left groups in Britain today, because there's been, as I mentioned, a huge rise in working class action and working class consciousness. And of course, for Marx and Marxists, that's the first duty of Marxists, to raise class consciousness, to get people to see through the capitalist lies. Right, okay, so I'm going to mention in about 30 seconds each about 10 different groups. The biggest one, of course, is the trade unions. Massive strike action. Bigger strike action than we have seen since the smashing of the miners in 1984 to 5, the deliberate smashing, brutal smashing, I mean physically brutal smashing of the miners' strike in 1984-5. But now we've got the railway workers, the postal workers, the nurses are balloting, the teachers are balloting for strike action. I voted for strike action for the University Lecturers Union, and it's likely to get very, very large and effective support. So there is massive, not massive, large and growing strike action. Not a general strike. These are individual, uncoordinated strikes for the most part. So we can't trust the TUC and the trade union leadership. I mean, if we look at the TUC 1926 general strike, the 1970s strikes of the miners, the 1984-5 strike, they never called a general strike. Or in 1926, they called it off after 9 days. The way forward, I think, and Nick Rack mentioned this, he's a lawyer. Recently, the lawyers, the barristers junior barristers, had an indefinite strike. Indefinite. So what happened? They were successful. They got 15% pay rise. Right, okay, so that's trade unions and strike action. Now, the
Dave,
next
just to
group,
let you know,
am I
through.
halfway through?
Mhm.
Oh, Jesus, right. Okay, right. That was not a prayer, that was an exclamation. Right, okay, enough is enough. Okay, very quickly, 700,000 people have signed up to it. We've had big rallies all over the country. The trouble is, it's a top-down organisation. No local democracy, although some groups, such as in Leicester, have set up their own local groups organising various organisations. The second one, Don't Pay UK. Well, I'm an active member of this as well, and it's brilliant in some ways. It's direct action. It's telling people, or threatening direct action, telling people, advising people, don't pay the gas and electric bills, which are doubling, trebling. Don't pay it. And I'm one of those who haven't paid. It's good. It's had many stunts and demonstrations. I've got huge criticisms of it. It's pretty much led by anarchists who are pretty hostile to organised working class organisations. Their leaderlessness and their single aim has its strengths, the single aim, but the leaderlessness and the single aim are deficient. They're not enough. They're certainly not a Marxist program. They're not even a set of demands, just one demand. Okay, there's other things which people might want to mention or ask me about or complain about or praise. People's Assembly, Jeremy Corbyn's Peace and Justice campaign, which is pretty much sunk like a trace. He could have formed a left easily, snapped his fingers, 200,000 people would have joined a Jeremy Corbyn-led party. Left Social Democrat, not Marxist, but even so. I'm not going to talk about the various spaghetti soup of Marxist groups and sects in Britain. I've been involved with many of them over a long time and worked very harmoniously and comradely. I share Rash's comments about we are not into bureaucratic, dogmatic centralism of some of the sects. It's actually the reason I joined the Fourth International, because it's the only Trotskyist group that seeks to propose, motivate, welcome minority viewpoints. And I'm a member of the tendency for a revolutionary international within the Fourth International, which is the left wing. The right wing is pretty much reformist in my view. Okay, what I haven't mentioned is groups. What I haven't mentioned is groups which have had huge demonstrations, Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter, massive, full of young people, full of kids, school kids, students, young people. And And of course, we have to work to get comrades or to develop political and class consciousness amongst those groups. Easier said than done. Of course, it is easier said than done. And finally, I want to mention there are, of course, thousands of local community groups, tenants associations, Feed the Poor, etc., of those local community groups. And in my ending up, where I say what I think should be done, in my ending up, and talk about the need for, and this is the view also of the socialist labour network, which I fully support in Britain, socialist labour network, which talks about the necessity of a new workers' party and movement, which is Marxist, which is undeniably Marxist, but which works with other organisations and groups without collapsing into them. In other words, keeping our own programme, our own understandings, our own membership, etc., etc. And there are questions about how to organise, which I've written on. Anybody's interested, Dave Hill, Antarsya, Antarsya. I've written about what my experiences and the comrades in Greece, who I think have got it right about organising the different socialist groups. But of course, it's important to go beyond the different socialist groups into the wider working class movement without losing the Marxist analysis and perspectives. Okay, well, question number 2 I'm going to deal with in about 1 minute. Where do we want to get to? Well, I want to get to the same place as Russia. And I've read Rise in Ireland. I've read Democratic Socialists of America. I am aware of the program of Octe Spartakos, which is my party. I'm a member of it. In Greece, Octe Spartakos, Greek section of the Fourth International. And yes, we don't just want reforms. We want to get rid of capitalism, overthrow capitalism, and we want a Marxist economy, society, not the old bureaucratic, monolithic dictation from above model, but a model, you could say, from below, aspects of workers' control. I'm not going to go into, do we want a minimalist policy? Of course we don't. That's pure reformism. Do we want a maximalist policy, or do we want a transitional program? And as a Trotskyist, I think there's a lot to be said for the transitional program, a program of demands which people largely support. And yet the capitalist class is not able to give in to those demands. And that's a transitional program. Okay, so how do we get there? Well, not in the Labour Party, not in the sects, the little grouplets, valuable though many of their comrades, most of their comrades are, not in leaderless single issue campaigns. So I'm going to talk about strategy. Okay, first of all, policy and leadership. Secondly, organisation. Thirdly, arenas of activism. How long have I got left, Rasha?
7 minutes.
Did you say 17?
7.
Okay. Right. What is to be done by revolutionary anti-capitalist Marxists? And our task is to work for revolutionary anti-capitalist understanding and leadership, maintaining our own organisation, our own analysis, our own program, and although this has some flexibility, not in a reformist direction, also Marxist policy. We cannot say that detailed policy. We cannot set a precondition or an entry ticker for our list of policies. So who do we work with? First of all the Marxist and socialist groups, although not the Zionist ones. Secondly, we work, as of course everybody probably at this meeting, everybody has done this, worked within mass movements and such as and trade unions, without, and I repeat this for about the third time, without collapsing into them, without collapsing into and losing our identity, losing our prospectus, losing our perspectives within a democratic, social democratic or Labour Party, or within broad parties of the left, like Mélenchon's France Insoumise or Podemos or Die Linke or Syriza, without losing our identity. Mustn't go into those. And also, I've had quite a few recent experiences with anarchists within the Don't Pay UK, which has got its strengths and advantages in mobilising people, but huge disadvantages. They want to see policy develop organically. Well, I want to see policies develop organically in a Marxist direction. They don't. And they, yeah, okay. And also we're not into purely the top down, the tops we call them in England. Don't know if that's what you call them in other countries. Trade union leaders, the leaders of the TUC, calling a one-day demonstration. And that's it for another 6 months. Not enough. So that's policy and leadership. The next bit is organisation. To build, what do we want? What do we want? We want to build a socialist working class party from the various left political groups, from the couple of 100,000 socialists like me who left the Labour Party, and also Marxists, work with Marxists in trade unions, etc., and in the mass organisations. But it's not easy, is it? I mean, all of us who have tried to do this work, it's not easy. People don't flock to you, except at certain times in history. And Richard Brenner has pointed out that in 1917, what started off as a demonstration developed into a general strike, developed into a revolutionary armed overthrow of the capitalist class. You never know, and you have to, or we have to be prepared. I can give lots of examples of that from my own history. Okay, so that's organisation. And the strategy. Strategy is about the strategy about where to be active. Okay, so
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Hey, you're good. Okay, strategy: direct action, electoralism, and local councils of action. Right, direct action. Recently, I was in Greece, involved in an occupation which was pretty successful. We don't do enough of it. In England, I think we should occupy all the energy company headquarters, etc. It's not much used in England. 4 of you, forget it. 400 of you, that's better. Electoralism, well, the Bolsheviks stood for election. We're not going to get what we want by elections through the bourgeois parliamentary system. They'll crucify any Marxist, let alone any left social democratic, let alone Marxist policy. But it's very useful for publicity, for using parliament and councils as a megaphone. And the third, and I think I better end up on this, except for a final rallying call. The third area, and this is what's new. It's local, well, it's not new at all. Local councils of action, coalitions against the cuts, coordinated working class action at a local level. And we got lots of experience in Britain. In Brighton, my city, a decade ago, we had 50 organisations involved in a campaign against the cuts. There's groups up and down the country. Huge history of this. Miners' support groups in the mid-80s, anti-poll tax union groups up and down the country, local groups feeding into a national organisation. And so my particular And of course, there's the movement of the squares in Greece, there's Soviets in Russia. The Socialist Labour Network, we call for action councils. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it might happen in 4 weeks' time when the bills start coming through the letterboxes and the emails. Calls for action councils in every town and city and borough, bringing together hundreds of thousands, aligned with Don't Pay UK, Enough is Enough, and all the other groups that I've mentioned. Right, okay, well, the end, conclusion. There's a world to win, comrades. There's a world to win and there's a world to lose. Currently in Britain, if you are poor, you die 10 years earlier than if you are rich. You have 19 years less healthy life. We are seeing social murder. We are seeing naked capitalism. I think we have to go for naked Marxism. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was great and perfectly on time as well. So thank you for that. So just there is a few people that came in late, so I just want to say again, sorry, just a few people in the waiting room. We are recording this session. If you would like me to, I can pause the recording during your contribution. So because it's a relatively large meeting, we'll try and keep contributions to about 4 minutes maybe. If there isn't that many people, people can come in for a second round, but if people want to start raising their Zoom hands, you can start doing that and I'll make a list. So I think we have Mike first and then Rami. So Mike, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mike Pickin. I'm speaking from Glasgow, although I've only lived here for 5 years, as you can tell from my accent. And I was like Dave, I was active in the Labour Party in England. But what I wanted to talk about was specifically about the national question and the whole question of the British state. Oh, you've stopped it. Says the host has stopped it. Okay, so the terms England, Britain, and the United Kingdom are often used interchangeably. They are not interchangeable phrases. They have quite distinct meanings, and these meanings are growing by the day. In fact, as the governmental crisis unfolds at Westminster around the Tory government, then so the crisis of the state is also unfolding. Britain is not only a union state, although it has many characteristics of a unitary state, and the 4 component parts of that union are quite different and distinct. And the difference between them has been growing. Now, there are some things that are UK-wide, there are some things that are Britain-wide, and there are some things that are specific to each of the component parts. So they are in order. England is the largest with 80% of the population, and that's where the confusion often begins. People think that when they're talking about politics in England, they're talking about politics in the whole of the state. Scotland has about 5 million people, Wales has 3 million, and the north of Ireland that's occupied by Britain has about 1.5, 2 million people. So it's not an insignificant part of the UK state that is not in England. It's 20% or so. In fact, a leading academic a few months ago from Scotland, unsurprisingly, wrote an academic paper called The End of British Politics, with British politics in inverted commas and a question mark at the end, to say that most analysis of so-called British politics was in fact Anglo-centric and didn't take account the specifics of the situation. So in Scotland, we face a very different situation to the one in which Dave has outlined for England. The Corbyn revolt in the Labour Party never happened in Scotland. The Labour Party has declined massively electorally in a country in which it was once the dominant force. And we now have the situation, particularly after the May 2021 Scottish Parliament elections, where the Scottish National Party, which is a social democrat, defines itself as a social democratic Party, and the Scottish Green Party, which also I would characterise as a left, on the left of the Green parties, and with more left social democratic policies than many social democratic parties, if that makes sense. And now the government, and of course the big demand is to have a second independence referendum, primarily motivated over the issue that Dave didn't mention at all, which is Brexit. And the crisis of the British state is very much tied up with the implementation of Brexit. I don't have time to go into it, but I just wanted to flag the fact that Brexit is an important driver of both the economic situation in Britain and also the political crisis that's erupted in the British state, particularly over the demand for Scottish independence. And people from outside the UK need to understand that. Of course, also the struggles take on a slightly different character because it's a more working, Scotland's a more working class part of the UK state. So we've had massive demonstrations and activities in Scotland around support for the rail workers, in particular for the communication workers currently ongoing, likely to be the university workers in the near future. We also had council workers on strike, and so on. And one of the important issues is that 90% of public servants in Scotland are employed not by the UK state, but by the Scottish state. And that has a character in the struggle, which means that the Holyrood Parliament and what happens at Holyrood is to some extent more important than what happens at the UK Parliament. We obviously also had the mass mobilisations around climate change, particularly over during the period of the COP26. And although there were big delegations internationally attending the COP, the vast majority of the 100,000 people who demonstrated—
Sorry, Mike, if you can—
yeah, I'm going to finish.
Wrap up.
The vast majority actually came from Scotland, and the climate movement, and particularly the whole question of North Sea oil and gas, which is a key part of the Tory plan, is under attack. I would also like to just mention that Wales has a very different political character as well, in that the Labour Party is still a dominant party in Wales, and that there are left-wing elements within the Welsh Labour Party. I don't disagree with Speaker about the question of the Labour Party in general, but I think in Wales, the Welsh Labour Party does have a specific character that needs to be recognised as different from the dynamics elsewhere. That's only a very short thing. I hope that's useful.
Thanks. Just to point out what Devon said in the chat, so turning off the camera just if your sound quality was going, if your internet connection, so just for that. So I have Brownie and then Glyn and then Nathan and then Matt. So go ahead.
Well, thank you, Rasha, and thank you, Dave. I really appreciate your talks as always. It's nice to hear your thoughts. I'm from Seattle chapter of Democratic Socialists of America. I'm in the leadership there, and we recently had successful rallies for reproductive justice and also a strike. I'm in a union, the Seattle Education Association. We'll try to get out we are working on getting reports out about those soon. But my question I wanted to ask about was this crisis in Britain. It seems like the reports I've seen have said Liz Truss came in and she wanted to try to implement classic neoliberal free market policies. Like she came in with this promise to cut taxes on corporations and the rich, and that backfired and she tanked the economy. And that's what's led to her being forced to resign. That the markets didn't like it. It threw the economy into a tailspin, it's created a huge crisis. But my question is, well, why is that the case? Because governments all around the world and political parties and leaders all around the world have implemented similar free market neoliberal policies, and the markets are usually very happy with them and appreciate less taxes on corporations and the rich. But in this case, they didn't like it. And I haven't been able to get clear information why. There was a decent article on the Jacobin website that had some useful concepts, but it's still hard for me to follow. And I was curious if Dave or anyone could enlighten us on why these neoliberal policies created such a backlash from the capital markets. And then I also was just curious, is that crisis going to happen in other countries? I've heard of some similar problems arising in Europe, which I haven't had a chance to study enough. And yeah, so that's my question. I'm curious if these crises would be repeated soon and cause similar labor upheaval, and why it's happening in Britain at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. So we have a few people on the list already, so I'll maybe let Dave in for a few minutes after Stefan, and then if more people want to raise their hands after that, and then you'll have another chance for some up at the end. But so next is Nathan, if you want to come in.
Hi, yeah, I'm Nathan, Austin Democratic Socialists, member of Reform and Revolution. Just had a quick question of whether or not in the midst of all this unrest, we might see either a Labour government come into power, or if the Conservatives might offer a few concessions to the working class in order to stay in power. And if that does happen, what effect do we think that might have on organizing efforts on the ground? I know that whenever the Democrats are in power in the United States, and the Democrats are nowhere near a left wing of anything, when the Democrats are in power, you still see a lot of a big damper on organizing efforts on the left, because they don't govern as outrageously as the Republicans on the right do, so you have less of that energy. I'm wondering if the British government might make some concessions to sort of dampen the outrage currently on the ground, and what effect that might have. So yeah, that's just my contribution, just that question.
Thanks. Guess we made back some time there. So Matt, if you want to go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello?
Go ahead. Go
Okay,
ahead.
thanks. Yeah. First, I want to thank the organizers of this. This is a great meeting. I'd like to thank the speaker and the moderator for doing such a good job moderating. What I'm going to say is a little bit heavy, but I'll try to move through it quickly. So, the working class right now globally is in an excruciating agony, and I think it's personal for all of us. And also our species is looking, down the barrel of a gun in terms of its own self-destruction, I believe, because I think it's quite possible that this decade we will be looking at a global food collapse induced by climate change and drought. So obviously the only solution to any of this is a socialist overhaul of the entire energy grid. And that means we got to get this done this decade. Now, workers' councils are great. I support the idea of them, but waiting for them to spontaneously form in the face of the apocalypse might be a bad idea. Which is why I've looked at other models of socialist governance, like the one advocated by Mike McNair, where he talks about multi-party socialism, just forming a parliament of socialists, which when you start to go in that direction, then you can use the methods of people like Gene Sharp in the movie How to Start a Revolution, and you can actually implement nonviolent regime change in countries across the world to basically save the species from our own collapse. His last tactic, Gene Sharp, he lists 198. The last one is called parallel government. And you can form a parallel government out of ordinary people by self-appointment from scratch, and I think these aren't immediate proposals to the people here. These are just things I could only request the people here begin studying and researching. Maybe you watch the movie How to Start a Revolution. It's free on YouTube. Start looking into these things, because we are the people who are going to save the world, or no one. And that's kind of how I feel. And again, thanks to the organizers. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Paul?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Russia. And thanks a million to Dave and to Mike and to Glyn for the picture that we're getting in terms of what's happening on the ground. Just to say, I think that Mike's point about Britain is absolutely fair. In terms of the multiple different political situations that are taking place, that it's not accurate to talk about British politics in the sense of one set of developments. One question I have for Dave is about Don't Pay UK. I was kind of watching it and watching their website and watching how many people had signed up not to pay on the 1st of October, and basically it stalled. It stalled a long time ago. at kind of mid 100 and something thousand, it's up to 200,000. People refuse to. Is my mic on?
You're back now, but you cut off for a bit.
Yeah, I
You're
keep switching my
back.
mic somehow. You hear me? Yeah.
No, we can't hear you anymore.
You hear me now?
Now we can hear you. Yeah.
I'll come back in. I don't know what's going on. I'll plug something in and plug back out.
Okay. All right. Dara, do you want to come in while Paul fixes his mic?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rasha. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Hi, comrades. It's good to discuss this, and thanks for Dave for joining us. And yeah, it's been a really good discussion so far, and I really enjoyed his introduction. I'll start off with a question. So I just wanted to ask Dave and others what they think are like Britain's status or prospects are as a world player. Like, I think it's quite clear that it's fallen from its position as a leading power, but it does still operate as a global financial hub and remains an active imperial power across the world, and specifically in the north of Ireland, as Fred mentioned. But then you'll have some British socialists in, say, Tribune or Novara. Like, I often listen to both their podcasts or read their articles, and they'll very often pose Britain as a former empire or a former imperial power, which plays only a junior role to the US or a minor role on the world stage. And I tend to disagree with that. Maybe if you just took a very functional or functional view of imperialism as like boots on the ground, you could pose it as that, but it's quite clear through its control of finance and also just like direct presence of the union across the country and in Ireland, that's questionable. But I was wondering what you think and what others think. In terms of what Dave was outlining and what you would be doing now, I agreed with much of what he said. Like, I thought you would want to be engaging with, or where there's something not present, forming united fronts through the country, while at the same time trying to cohere a revolutionary cadre group akin to, say, how Rise is operating now in People Before Profit in Ireland. And that's some things we've written on in terms of like the dual task facing revolutionaries. I agreed with what Dave was saying in terms of engaging. You would throughout the country be engaging, I think, with the Enough is Enough campaign, the Don't Pay campaign, various environmental formations, the Scottish independence campaign, even though you see like inadequacies in much of the internal life or the internal politics of most of these things, I think it's quite clear that there's sections of British society and the British working class moving to the left and looking for an alternative. So you would want to be there. So I thought I agreed with that. And then where there's an absence of something in different parts of the country, I think you would be looking to form a united front as a vehicle for that. That formation, I think, would need to be clear on the inadequacies of the Labour Party, the weaknesses in the unions, although they can have like stellar show-outs, which we've seen recently. It's clear that there's some weakness there. I thought the calling off the strikes after Elizabeth Windsor died and some other things show that there's still a bit of a gap there. And I think any formation would need to also stand against what like is rampant British nationalism and imperialism. I thought the fact that like even Labour Party are banging that drum now just shows how that kind of ebbs and flows and returns to a high tempo. So I thought Dave was right on the nature of the British Labour Party, which seems to have like moved quite decisively to the right through the country, with the ruling clique around Starmer clearly hostile to workers and subservient to British capital. But at the same time, you wouldn't want to close yourself off from the sections of the working class who still have illusions and expectations that some section in the Labour Party, and I think Labour coming to power probably does open up. There would be considerations, I imagine, from some sections of like, this will win us more. It should be different to the Tories in some material way. So maybe that does offer some space to operate. So I wouldn't close off, even though I do personally think, I'd imagine you'd have to think the more advanced sections of the working class after the Corbyn experience do see Starmer for what he is. And you can certainly see that in the reaction to, say, him the other day saying he wouldn't support the nurses, or his reactions to the Labour strikes. So I think, revolutionaries should be clear on that and its character and avoid tailing it. But yeah, I've covered a bit. So really good discussion, and thanks again for joining us, Dave.
Thanks, Tara. I will let Paul back in for the rest of his contribution.
Thanks, Rasha. Sorry about that, everybody. Hopefully it doesn't go again. Yeah, actually what Mike is responding to in the chat is the kind of thing I'm interested in, as in non-payment as a central tactic. To what degree is it being utilized? Can it be utilized? And I'm asking partly from the point of view of in Ireland, we in People for Profit took quite a successful initiative of launching a broad coalition, the cost of living coalition. That's ourselves, Sinn Féin, sections of the trade union movement. We did have the support of the equivalent of the Trade Union Congress for a major protest we organized, different left groups, campaigning groups, etc. We mobilized maybe 15,000 people on the streets. It was quite successful. We cut ourselves out in that kind of programmatically with an emphasis on we have to nationalize the energy system. It isn't enough to call for price controls. But in terms of a strategy for the movement, if we could have a strategy, and we've a history in Ireland of very successful non-payment campaigns, for example, of water charges, but it is difficult. It is a very different question than non-payment of something that the state is imposing for people not to pay private companies. So I'm just interested in the experience of to what degree has it been tried out and tested. Second point is, I think you have to start from where you're at. And from where you're at, the most positive thing to me right now seems to be what's happening around Enough is Enough, as in big mobilizations. Well, the strike movements, number one, then Enough is Enough, which is linked to the strike movements in a certain sense. I get the impression, and I'm interested in knowing whether this is accurate, that it's relatively tightly controlled by the trade union leaders who very much have a political orientation. Even if they're critical of Starmer, they want Labour in, Tories out, etc. But to what degree is there space there? Is there any local groups being set up through Enough is Enough that have a genuine character that could become the vehicle for something, even if not immediately a political challenge to the Tories and Labour, but a certain space for self-organisation? Third thing, just a question about to what degree has Enough is Enough or other groups connected the climate crisis to the cost of living crisis? Because I think that's a crucial task for eco-socialists today. So I thought it was very positive in France. You saw the demonstration, major demonstration in Paris around the central slogan of cost of living crisis and climate inaction, linking the two in a very, very strong way by the leadership. And I think we absolutely have to be doing that in terms of the program that we put forward. We have to say these are two sides of the same coin of capitalism, and that the answers to the cost of living crisis have to also tackle the climate crisis. So nationalizing the energy sector, drive towards renewables, but also measures to reduce energy usage, cutting data centers, frequent public transport, retrofitting of homes, etc., etc. So to what degree are those featuring as demands, and it's the combining of the issues? I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Mike?
Hey there. Hey, my name is Mike Horn. I know someone in Seattle DSA. I'm not a member, but I'm a trade union organizer here in Seattle. I'm actually a dual citizen of the US and the UK as well. And I actually used to live in Brighton, actually, for quite some time. So yeah, everything that's been going on in the UK with the resurgence of the union activity and rising class consciousness is something I've been paying attention to for a long time, and especially over the past few years. So I appreciate the presentation today and all the information everybody's giving, and Dave especially. But I had a question for Dave, and really, I guess this is like a two-part question related to the prospects of using electoralism as a strategy, and particularly what's going on with the Labour Party. David mentioned that, he still knows people that believe that, people should still be within the Labour Party trying to work within it, which I guess is kind of the same vein that people here in the United States feel about the Democratic Party, trying to infiltrate it, push it further left and all of that. But just given the Labour Party's response to left-wingers, post Corbyn. I mean, Sam Terry getting sacked for attending an RMT picket line. Most recently last week, Maurice McLeod, who was trying to stand for Camberwell and Peckham, being denied the ability to even stand for an MP seat because of a social media post that, he liked a post from Caroline Lucas, and the Labour Party was saying, we're going to use that to stop you from even running. I mean, given that, like, I guess my question would be the people that that are still advocating for working within the Labour Party, what do they think the strategy is really going to be to push back and take on Starmer and really rebuild the Labour left within the party? And then the second question I have, kind of building off of that, is I guess with the Enough is Enough campaign, I was listening to a interview with Eddie Dempsey and Mick Lynch from a couple months ago, where they were saying, the interviewer asked them, is this going to be the launch of a new party? And they fervently denied it, said, no, we're not interested in that. This is a working class movement. But I'm curious if the feeling is different among people that are, activists within the movement, if they feel like maybe this is something that could be used to launch a new national party, something that can be used to combat labor and maybe push them further left. I don't know. Yeah, those are my questions. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Stefan?
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. Is this okay? Can you hear me okay? Or
Yeah, we can hear you.
okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dave, for the introduction and all the contributions that were made. I think that the question of a party, of organizing against this collapsing capitalist system, and it's stunning how this government collapsed, and I think also the economy of the once mighty British imperialism and its decline. The question of organizing is key, and I feel just like it's a bit we oversee a little bit too easily what has happened in the attempt to build an opposition with Corbyn. I put in the chat a link to an article. There's an interview within that with Dave at the time about his experience in the Corbyn movement, in the Labour Party, in fighting back. And I think the fact that in that period from 2015 to 2020, hundreds of thousands of young people joined the Labour, mainly young people, not only, but mainly young people, joined the Labour Party to change the course of action, to take active part in politics, to build a tool for their interests. I think that is just something I feel like outside of Britain, and sometimes even in Britain, this is underestimated, what a huge uprising this was. And now we are 2 years later, that this generation who entered the political plane at that time, that they did not fully recover yet, that there is no new attempt right now. I feel like it's quite understandable, and that there are now more experiences on the industrial plane and movement and whatever, but I'm sure that these people will come back. But the question is, what conclusions do we draw from that, and what conclusions do we have to look at from the Corbyn experiment? I felt like obviously the media frenzy, the attacks on Corbyn, whatever, it was vicious. The ruling class really mobilized its resources against Corbyn. I think it's absolutely clear that Corbyn never had an answer to these media attacks and to the sabotage within his own party, the party establishment. He did not base himself on really mobilizing these new people, taking over, kicking out the right wing. He waited until they were strong enough to kick him out. So there was this mismatch of what Dave described as a classical social democrat with good demands, but unwilling to fight this through. And I would also mention just the momentum leadership, which was so very well positioned to organize there, to build a movement, keep people together in a democratic way, and they refused to do that top down. Within that, I also would think, and there's not, but these are the main factors to blame, but I think the revolutionary socialist left in Britain was not consequent enough to fully engage in that, join Labour there, be part of that, challenge them despite all the odds and obstacles there from undemocratic structures in Labour and in Momentum and else. That is something, a lesson I would draw from that. wherever this happens, I believe that the Labour Party was already dead before that. I think then things change. People, out of any opportunity, people are forced to choose very complicated tools to try to enforce working class interests. And we've got to engage in that, whether we like it or not, the place and be there. I just think there is then also the whole question of 30 seconds warning. I think there's also the question of Brexit that Corbyn and the revolutionary left, I think, was not fully able to deal with, and what was used to break his neck. It's absolutely clear that this right-wing, nationalist, populist way out of the European Union, against the sentiment, against the domination of German imperialism, Brussels and Berlin, whatever, is no way out. It's a catastrophe, and for the British economy, and a part of this, the background that then the markets do not even trust Liz Truss and the Conservative Party to give them gifts and tax cuts and whatever, and there is complete meltdown there. It's a huge instability. But the ability for the left to challenge us to take this on the one side fight against the EU as a non-reformable capitalist institution, but then at the same time to also warn about this right-wing nationalist populist way. I think that was a bit a challenge. That I got the warning that I've got to wrap up, and I can't go much into it, but I think we would need to have more discussions.
That's it. Thanks, Stefan. So I originally had said that we'd bring Dave back in for 5 minutes after Stefan, but I recognize that there has been a lot of questions. So I might just refer to you. Would you like to come in for kind of 5 or 10 minutes now and a short sum up at the end?
I would. There's some beautiful questions there. Yeah, I would.
Okay. Well,
I'd like to speak now for another 2 hours, but I won't.
I think, yeah, maybe that's a bit beyond our limit.
Okay, so let's go. A couple of minutes on various other questions, going in reverse order. Stefan, actually, I couldn't hear Stefan very well. What would have happened? What would have happened if Corbyn had won and he came so close to winning, despite the actual sabotage within the central party headquarters of the Labour Party, diverting resources away from left-wing candidates in favour of right-wing candidates? They were astonished. It was shown on television. Their faces were shocked when Corbyn nearly won the election. What would have happened if he had won? A dream for the hundreds of thousands of us who rejoined Labour when Corbyn was elected leader. So the first thing that probably happened would be that 250 of the 300 Labour MPs elected, or 300 of the 350 Labour MPs which would have been elected, would have immediately formed a new party and a government. They might have called an election, but they would have had a parliamentary coup, just like happened with Liz Truss a few days ago. Had that not happened, had Corbyn stayed in power, supported, for example, by mass demonstrations on the streets, etc., then it is likely that he would have been killed, assassinated, or removed. I mean, let's remember that even in the 1960s, 1964, when Harold Wilson was elected, it's been subsequently shown that top levels of the British state, military, political establishment were talking about a coup of the colonels. And this is what happens, isn't it? Whenever you get a left-wing government, a very left-wing government elected, you get destabilization, financial destabilization, and if necessary, physical murder. Right. So that was a little bit about in response to Stefan. Stefan, yeah, I stayed in the Labour Party. I was in the Labour Party, and I'm still in touch. Various comrades have said, look, there are some very good comrades still in the Labour Party. There are. And in my local branch, which has got about 300 members, in my local branch, about 12 of us meet, 10 of us meet regularly. 5 of us have been expelled from Labour and 5 have stayed in. So we are still in touch and we still work with those, and they still come to some of the same demonstrations and events. Right, Mike. Yeah, so I've looked at. So Mike Horn from Seattle. Yeah, you listen to Mick Lynch. Wonderful, pure class politics, pure working class language and analysis. But enough is enough. You're quite right. I went to their rally in Brighton recently, 1,500 people. It's all about getting Labour back into office. I was friends with Bob Crow, loose friends, I won't make any great claims. Bob Crow, the wonderful former leader, died of a heart attack, of the RMT, the most radical union in Britain, the railway workers union, basically. At least under Bob Crow, the RMT was dedicated to forming a party to the left of Labour, and he supported something called Tusk, for which I fought 2 parliamentary elections. It's a coalition of Marxist and socialist and trade union groups. So Bob Crow, the former leader of the point here is that the RMT at this moment is saying vote Labour, but comrades are right to say they'll face immense anger and pressure from below, and that could change. Right. Right, now Paul asked a number of questions. Well, I've got quite severe reservations about Don't Pay UK, but you got to hand it to them. You got to hand it to them. Okay, 200,000 people have signed up. They wanted 1 million. Today, this afternoon, I got the latest national missive from Don't Pay UK. There's a new date, 1st of December, and that number will go up because the government, the latest version of the Tory government has said that are only going to help cover, to an extent, gas and energy bills for 6 months. So there's going to be that level of anger, and there are. I've been on the Don't Pay UK leafleting stalls, demonstrations, burning the bills in public. That will grow, but the problem with Don't Pay UK, they have no policy other than reverse the charges. They refuse to say nationalise the energy companies. They refuse to say tax the rich. They refuse to have any policy other than don't pay. In some of the speeches they might make various of these points. But I've met, I don't mean personally, but people expressing my views have met considerable hostility to us putting forward a much broader policy. So that's yeah.
Just a heads up, that's 5
all right,
minutes.
I'll just
so
make
if
one
you
more
want
point in response to
yeah.
Paul, and perhaps I'll come back on some of the other points later. Who knows? The electricity companies are very worried. Open Democracy has released details of one of the biggest energy company, saying that there is an existential threat to the energy companies if people stop paying their bills. And so my prediction is that there will indeed be 300, 400, 500,000, and there'll be rallies and there'll be marches. And our job is to bring those together and to infuse them, to give Marxists, to attempt to inform them with Marxist analysis and program.
Thanks, Dave.
You did stop me there, didn't you?
Well, I was going to give you a few more minutes, but since there's only 2 people on the list, I do want to encourage people if anyone else wants to come in. So, okay, 3 people, and then we can come back to Dave in the end for a sum up as well. So,
well, I've still got 17 people to reply to.
What? Group the questions. But if maybe 1 or 2 more people, but Kostas, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, comrades. I'm Kostas from Greece. I'm member of OCDE Spartakos and the Fourth International, and also member of the Tendency for Revolutionary International, that is the left opposition to the leadership of the Fourth International. I want to bring 2 points. The first point is that it seems to me that were discussing all over again a revolutionary strategy without taking in account the experiences we had in Greece and Spain with Syriza and Podemos. Because Podemos and Syriza were parties of the left, reformist parties, that came to power and exercised power and governmental power for some years in those two countries. All the international left had illusions in these parties. They rallied, all left groups worldwide supported the experiment of Syriza and Podemos that ended up in failure. Those two parties, they applied, they implemented neoliberal policy, and the result was that all the popular movements and the mass movements collapsed in those two countries. In Greece, especially, we still have a very much neoliberal government with using oppressive apparatus daily, suppressing strikes and the social movements. That's one point that I have to bring into the discussion, that it seems that we didn't draw the correct conclusions from past experiences when reformist left parties came into power. The second point I want to raise has to do with the war in Ukraine. All the discussion revolves around various matters of revolutionary strategy without taking into account the special conditions that we're facing, and this is an imperialist war in our backdoor. And I think the stand that the left, all left organizations take towards the war in Ukraine is very crucial, because to my mind is going to cause a major realignment in the revolutionary left, and not only the revolutionary left, worldwide. Because most of left organizations, they seem to support unconditionally shipping of arms to Ukraine. Ukraine is, just to mention, has a government that has forbidden the functioning of all opposition parties, and is in a major agreement with neo-Nazi groups. That's true. The neo-Nazi organizations are integrated in the armed forces of Ukraine. So we only look at the imperialist intervention of Russia and what happens in Russia, but we tend to dismiss what happens in Ukraine. We're against this imperialist war, but mostly we have to advocate a policy of revolutionary defeatism. The main enemy is our own bourgeoisie, and our own bourgeoisie is strictly aligned with NATO, and it is not in the favor of the working class internationally to strengthen NATO, and NATO comes out of this this war as a winner. So for me, we have to reconsider our Leninist principles and the stand that Lenin took in the war, Lenin and Trotsky took in the war, and we don't have to support unconditionally the policy of NATO in Ukraine. For me, this is a very important issue, because we have to, in our analysis, in our revolutionary strategy considerations, we have to take in account what happens in Ukraine and how every single organization is positioned towards this war. This war is a major event.
Please wrap up.
Sorry?
If you want to wrap up, please.
Yeah, I will wrap up. Okay. Some people, they tend to say that and put forward in their analysis that the energy crisis and all the movements, which has this result to the rise of the don't pay electricity bills and so up movements. It comes from originates from the crisis in Ukraine. But this is not the reason. It is the crisis of capitalism has caused, which originates the last phase of this crisis is from 2008, long before the events in Ukraine, has caused this energy crisis, the result we see now. Therefore, these 2 points, the experience we had with broad parties of the left has to be considered, and we have to take in account in our current analysis about the revolutionary strategy, our stance towards the war in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thanks. So again, sorry for having to cut off people, just trying to be fair to everyone. So I think we have Cian and Philip next. There's time for maybe 2 more contributions after, if anybody wants to come in for a first or a second contribution. And then we'll go to Dave for a wrap up. And thanks already everyone for really great discussion. So Cian, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks, and thanks to Rasha and everybody as well, and thanks particularly. I could listen to Dave all day. It's always an inspiring hearing him speak. Always a passionate and energizing speaker. So just a couple of questions, mainly in particular. I don't know if our friend from Scotland, or like that's based in Scotland, is still there, but if they are still there, I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about the situation in Scotland and the position of the left there in particular. A couple of things. Like one, there's a certain parallel with Ireland. I'd be interested in the challenges that are posed by having like an SNP regional government who, like, pose left at times, but I'm sure are implementing capitalist austerity policies, etc. There could be but then they can also use nationalism to like give them a raison d'etre for existing. And just because there could be parallels there, it's a challenge that we could face in Ireland with possible Sinn Féin government, and yeah. But also, like the left in Scotland, obviously, in the one hand, seems to me to be the very weak, the socialist left anyway. They shot itself in the foot with the whole SSP and all of that stuff in a big way. But the flip side of it is that the electoral system does seem to benefit. There seems to be more possibilities for the socialist left there, because it's pure. It's not the same pressure of first past the post and all of that. And it does strike me that like PVP type model, which is doing the mass work and the big protests, but also like picking key areas in which you do like thankless kind of work, local community building, base building work. You do have to do some of that grind stuff as well. Winning council seats, ultimately now in the south we have Dáil seats. It does strike me that that Scotland is a possibility for that. So anyway, I'd be interested in hearing a bit more about like what is the situation in Scotland. And then in terms of England and Wales, obviously it's more complicated. It seems to me that it's particularly complicated because like the revolutionary left in broadly defined did not really come out of the Corbyn experience strengthened. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but like it doesn't look like, we had this big massive thing, and Corbyn sold it out, and I agree, like that's the key thing. But like the revolutionary left it doesn't seem to me to have really captured much from that. And I do feel that I wonder from the outside backseat driver, but like if part of the problem is that most of the organised revolutionary left didn't follow Dave's example. They were not in the Labour Party, they were commenting from the sidelines. That's always something that, like, I agree, I'm very interested in Antarsya and that sort of stuff, but it always did strike me that I always thought that was a mistake that Antarsya made as well, of being like one step removed from where the real battle was in Syriza. And partly that also seems that like we didn't make enough gains out of that defeat or that sellout as maybe you could have. But in Britain and in England and Wales, it does strike me that, like, I don't know, the revolutionary left hasn't come out of that as strengthened as you would have hoped, and maybe that was because they weren't in saving something from the ashes of that experience. But what is going, like, I know I'm all talking about electoral stuff, and maybe it is just that like Tusk seems to be a dead end. Maybe electoral stuff is not in England and Wales, it's just not really a possibility. Maybe, and then it is more building those bases in union work and I don't know, And then the final thing, and again probably for Scotland, is for both, but is that I would be interested in hearing more about how the Ukraine stuff is playing out locally. I agree with Costas, like it's a major problem that most of the socialist left has sort of like adopted a very poor position on this, taking essentially a NATO side. In Ireland, the PVP has managed to take a more principled anti-imperialist position, and there's also a bigger basis to that in Ireland because there's certain anti-imperialist tradition, and I wonder how that plays out in Scotland. I see a lot of news in England. I'm sure it's kind of similar to, but in Scotland, how is that? Is there a space there for a more critical, consistent anti-imperialist? But yeah, anyway. Or in England, if Dave wants to talk about that as well.
Thanks, Cian. So I just want to say that the contribution list is closed for now. So we have Philip, and then I'll take Brendan first because he's a first contribution, and then Matt. And if there is some time from these speakers left over, Glenn indicated first, so you could come back in for a minute. Sorry, Mike, we are running out of time. There is a lot of questions, so Dave, you will have the time in the end to sum up. So Phil and then Brendan.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Great. Just introducing myself. Philip from the US and Reform and Revolution Caucus and DSA. Thank you everyone for the really valuable contributions and discussions. I just wanted to comment on this question. Paul mentioned how important it is to link the cost of living crisis to the climate crisis, which I fully agree. But I, in a similar way, want to take up the point that also Cian just ended on, that I think also it's really key for revolutionary socialists to also raise in the movement around the cost of living crisis the question of the disastrous war in Ukraine, and the need to put forward an anti-imperialist policy and build a global peace movement. I mean, clearly the war in Ukraine, there's inflict enormous suffering, first and foremost for the ordinary peoples of Ukraine, the Russian people. There's of course the horrendous danger of growing danger of a nuclear conflict, which threatens the whole world. But also, assuming the worst case scenario doesn't happen, just on the course of if the nuclear threat is not posed just on the existing dynamic, it is also impacting working people all around the world. Obviously, first and foremost, the poorest, but also workers in the US and in Europe and England, Wales, and Scotland, in terms of it is definitely a major contributing factor towards the skyrocketing cost of energy and food. And I think, that's a result of the disruption of the war itself, inevitably, but also a major factor is the Western US NATO-led sanctions on the Russian economy. So I think within the cost of living, the movement to address the crisis of the cost of living, I think it is an opportunity and necessary if we're going to put forward a serious program of how to address the cost of living crisis, for socialists to raise in that the need for an end to this disastrous war, that there's an urgent need for peace. And that requires building a peace movement on an anti-imperialist basis. First and foremost, raising the most dire threat that it's completely unacceptable have any threat of nuclear exchanges and any use of nuclear weapons by Putin, but also the belligerent escalating approach of NATO, which raises the risks and stakes of a nuclear conflict, to demand a Russian withdrawal from Ukraine, with accepting the right of self-determination of the Ukrainian peoples, but also minorities within Ukraine. And a critical part of doing that is to build support globally for the Russian left and the Russian anti-war movement, to build opposition within Russia against Putin's brutal right-wing nationalist and pro-capitalist regime. And part of that, I think, some of the things we can do in the US and England and Wales and Scotland and Europe to help assist building an anti-war movement in Russia is coming out clearly against NATO. The threat of NATO is a key force that Putin uses to keep to keep a mood of national unity, and also coming out against the sanctions that are being imposed, not narrow sanctions on the oligarchs, but the broad-based sanctions on the Russian economy, which are hitting the ordinary people in Russia and rebounding against working people around the world. So I think I'll just wrap up on this. I think that just speaking from the US, the main left forces in the US, there's 4 socialist members of Congress who are members of DSA. There's also Bernie Sanders. They have all gone along completely, scandalously. They have gone along voting for the war funding, voting for the sanctions, and they've left the terrain totally open to right-wing forces like Tucker Carlson on Fox News, to a minority of the far right of the Republican Party. They are now the only ones protesting against the US spending $70 billion so far this year. And that number is going to go up in aid to Ukraine as a proxy war against Russia when there's a cost of living crisis here in the United States. So I think the left, that's a really critical issue for debate in the left, and for the left to break its support for NATO and Western imperialism and take a principled anti-imperialist peace policy against both Russian imperialism and in our countries, first and foremost, against NATO and Western imperialism, and demand an end to this disastrous war.
Thanks, Philip. Brendan?
Hi, my name is Brendan Young. I lived in England and mostly in Wales for 1980 to 2000, most of the time spent in Wales. I was over there recently and happened upon a meeting organized, I think by Enough is Enough, but it was a small meeting, particularly in the light of the speakers. Mark Sawatka was speaking, the Deputy General Secretary RMT was speaking, leadership of the Education Union was speaking, but there were probably 50 odd people at it. It looked like it had been organized by CWI people. The form of organization was similar to that. But one of the things that Sawatka said was that they were looking to coordinate the PCS strikes, that's the state workers' strikes at the lower level, with other strikes. And I'm wondering if anything has come of that. He wasn't calling for a general strike, but he was looking to have coordinated strikes. I agree with Wyke that Scotland and Wales are different, and I think Wales is different to Scotland. There's clearly the failure of the mass movement for independence went into the SNP, but that it's not the same in Wales. The national movement isn't the same, and it's less a national movement than a movement for democracy in the British state. The Labour Party is different in Wales and didn't go as fully Blairite, much to my surprise. I was in it myself for a good while. So I think there's a case for a united front orientation with the Labour Party where that's appropriate. The Labour Party in London and such like may be different to parts of the north of England. So I think one should have a flexible approach to that. On Brexit, I think the left made a big mistake in Britain on that in supporting a left Brexit. There was never a left Brexit option. It was always a nationalist populist campaign. I think they should have adopted a remain but break the rules approach and been explicit about what rules they would have broken. I think the same approach is valid in Ireland, quite apart from the popularity of remaining in the European Union. I agree with Stefan on the failures of momentum. The same failures were evident at the time of the Ben campaign in the 80s, in which I was involved, and the subsequent campaigns. But I do think the left, and I'm referring mostly here to the SWP, should have considered entering the Labour Party at the time of the emergence of the Corbyn movement. This was the sort of approach that Trotsky advocated in Spain in relation to the PSP during the 30s, that there was a mass engagement of youth in the PSP, and said that the Trotskyist or the revolutionary group should enter and fight for leadership of that. I think that should have been done. And I think there's a rigidity in relation to social democracy on the part of the left in Britain. On the Ukrainian war, I agree with Kostas. I think this is really important. I think that the underlying issues here is that the US is using NATO strategically to assert or reassert US hegemony in Europe. It's explicitly against any significant German links with the Russian economy. It's designed to break that and designed to ensure that there is no independent European bourgeois foreign policy to that of the US. The same was done in relation to the war in Bosnia and the bombing of Serbia. That was all about asserting US hegemony. Currently, it's in preparation for a much more significant conflict with China. What's going on in the Ukraine war is two gangster states, the bigger and more dangerous one looking for encirclement of the other. But the major issue is dragooning the European states into line behind the US. So the strategy is to use NATO in that regard. And I agree with Philip in relation to being opposed to NATO in that regard and breaking with it. Just finally, in relation to dealing with social democratic or left governments and left parties in power, we're going to be facing this with Sinn Féin here, who are likely to be in office in a coalition. And I think there may be a split there, there may not, but I think we should have a united front orientation towards them. Thanks.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, Rasha.
Sorry, Dave, you're going to have a lot to cover in the sum up, but so I think we'll go straight back to you for 10 minutes, and will I give you a heads up at 5 minutes?
Yeah, do that. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your chairing, by the way. Keeping me in order. Yeah. Okay. Right. A number of questions. Kian asked, did the revolutionary left come out of the Corbyn experience strengthened? Depends how you define the revolutionary left. The sects didn't. No. SWP didn't come out strengthened. The SP didn't. Socialist Alternative didn't. The Alliance for Workers' Liberty, the Zionist Marxists, they didn't. Counterfire may have done, because Counterfire has got the biggest, I mean, it's a split off from the SWP and suffers from some of the same problems as the SWP, but they have a good presence, a good media presence. So perhaps they did, but in general, the left groups didn't. But that's not the whole of the revolutionary left. I think those sections, those comrades who were not in those abstentionist, isolationist, we are right, nobody else is right groups, I think those of us who were not in any of those groups did come out strengthened. I mean, look, 200,000 people have left the Labour Party since Corbyn was replaced by Starmer. Now, they didn't do it because they just fancied the weather or something. They did it because they were disgusted. They have learned. It has been a massive learning experience. The extent to which the British state and the leadership of the Labour Party will prevent any meaningful, certainly any, I was going to say any radical change, but certainly prevent any socialist change. We see that. I mean, one of the comrades mentioned about two parliamentary candidates who have been prevented from standing. Come on, this is happening in every town in the country. There's been in my city in Brighton, the Labour Party. I was once a councillor there. The Labour Party had a majority, but then because of a tweet they made or a Facebook post they made 7 years ago, 3 Labour councillors have been suspended or expelled. This is happening in just about every town in the country. It's not just a few. And today I see that Laura Pidcock, not a name, well known outside England, I imagine. Put it this way, she was going to be the deputy leader of the Labour Party, or one of the very close leaders of the Labour Party, if Jeremy Corbyn had won. Today, she has resigned from the Labour Party. So there are a couple of 100,000 comrades who have come out strengthened ideologically strengthened, if you like, in a Marxist direction. Right. Now, Brendan mentioned about enough is enough. And I must say, I've given my criticisms. It's top down, no democracy, no debate, no questions, just big speeches from the big leaders. That's a huge problem. But then, as I or other people might have mentioned, there have been groups up and down the country setting up, some under the name Enough is Enough. I don't think there are many yet, but they can grow. Some under the name of Don't Pay UK, some under the name of, for example, Wellingborough Independent Socialists, you know, a group of comrades who have been meeting inside and outside the Labour Party with some from the sects. So there are these local, you can use the word organic. These things are happening, but enough is enough. Brendan mentioned a disappointing meeting of 50 in South Wales or somewhere. Well, there were 10,000 at the rally in London, 5,000 in Manchester, 2,000 in Bristol, in my own city of 250,000 people, between 1 and 1,500. I was there. And it is quite right. He made a very good point that yeah, Mick Lynch and the others are saying vote Labour, but a point that other comrades have made is, but there will be, I mean, Mick Lynch is to the left of most of the other union leaders. He's to the left of the Trade Union Congress, the coordinating group of trade unions in England. And I think what we work for, we hope for, we work for, we strive for, we organise for, is for those left-wing trade unions to local branches, national level, to actually disaffiliate from the Labour Party and to support the setting up of a new party. A new party must have links with trade unions, if not with the official national trade unions, then with local shop stewards committees, to use an old-fashioned phrase, as a former shop steward myself. So we do have to have those links with organised labour.
That's 5 minutes.
Look, there's a couple of other big items here. Like I stood for the European Parliament under Lexit, left exit, and yes, I know the horrible nationalist, xenophobic, and extreme right-wing economic fiscal policies which motivated many people to vote for Brexit. But I say one thing to people who criticise Lexit, a left exit from the European Union, which I supported. And the one thing is this: Corbyn nearly won. Now, what a different Brexit we would have had if Corbyn had won. It would have been a very minimal Brexit, maintaining social protections, legal regulations on regarding the environment, food standards, workers' rights, etc. So I think it was right at that stage to support Lexit under the extreme right wing of the Tory party. And I use that word advisedly, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But under the extreme right wing of the Tory party, then we have had a horrific Brexit. I mean, trade with the EU is down 20%. We've seen this much vaunted Boris Johnson. I have a policy on Brexit, oven baked. Oven baked? Nothing happened. There's been no trade deals except for, I don't know, with one of the islands in the Caribbean. I'm not sure. Okay, so that's about Lexit. Ukraine. Well, I'm in lockstep with the comments already made. I mean, it's quite clear that the United States capitalist class will fight to the last Ukrainian. Quite clear. I won't develop on this because my comments would be identical to those of a couple of the comrades who have already spoken, such as my Greek brother and comrade Kostas. A couple of other things, I think. Yeah, broad parties. Yeah, they were the hope. They were the hope of the right wing of the Fourth International. You know, Podemos, Syriza, Die Linke, O Bloco Esquerda in Portugal, and groups in many countries. And Kostas is quite right. When Marxists joined those, They rapidly lost their identity. They became submerged in and insignificant within Podemos and Syriza. And furthermore, and I've written on this, if you Google Dave Hill Antasia, furthermore, whenever the broad left parties have got into power, either in the Länder in Germany or in different countries, they've seen their votes plummet because they're carrying out reformist neoliberal policies, managing capitalism. And of course, in this current stage of capitalism, managing capitalism means managing the cuts, managing austerity. So I have no time for broad parties of the left as an organisational tool. Right, Nathan, I think I'll make like 2 more points. How am I doing, Rasha? 2 more minutes?
Yeah.
You didn't make a rude sign at me then, did you?
No, I said 2. It's a very good sign.
Right. So somebody's, I forget who, somebody said, who's going to win the next? There's no doubt whatsoever Keir Starmer will win the next general election. I mean, the Tories will be reduced to a rump. Now, Liz Truss tried this extreme neoliberalism, extreme version, and it's been replaced by Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, who has announced, there's a French phrase, actually I know it better in Portuguese, quem paga a crise, who pays for the crisis? It's the workers. So there's austerity coming. Massive, in Britain and many other countries have had 10 years of austerity, 10 years of austerity. And now Hunt is saying, we've got to pay back this money we borrowed to give to the energy companies. We've got to pull in our belts. But some people will die. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. There will be deaths of people from cold and from hunger in this, the 6th richest country in the world. So Hunt has promised austerity. And I better conclude on this because Russia's fidgeting. So Hunt will go, Labour will be in power within, I don't know, 6 months, at the maximum 2 years. Labour will be in power with a massive majority, tiny number of socialist MPs, absolutely tiny. At the minute, there's only 30, and only 9 of them signed a Stop the War campaign petition. They were ordered to withdraw their signatures and not to appear and stop the war. Right. So what will Starmer do? Cuts. There'll be the odd, yes, of course, there'll be the odd reform, like he will not enact the current Tory proposals to further restrict strike action, but will he reverse the Thatcher's rules against on strike action? Of course he won't. Will he? He may well have he may be pushed into having a tax on the energy companies, a windfall tax. In fact, that he probably will do. But there's not going to be much difference between right-wing social democracy and non-extreme neoliberalism. So that leads us to, and here I'll conclude, I guess. That leads us to say that we live, to recognise we live in momentous times. And Lenin has got a phrase: there are decades when nothing happens. There are weeks when decades happen. Comrades, those weeks are in front of us. We recognise that if we don't take the initiative, if we are not successful, we see the growth of fascism. We see the growth of right-wing, rabid authoritarianism. We don't yet have Bolsonaro, Orban, the Italian leader. We don't yet have fascists in power. We have extreme right-wing compared to European conservatives. But Marx, and this is my final sentence, Marx, and here's a quote from the Communist Manifesto: all that is solid melts into the air. All that is holy is profaned. And man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life. And that is what millions are coming to see. And this is the development of class consciousness, the ability to recognize the monsters that devour us, and that we have to combat those monsters. Okay, thank you, comrade.
Thank you so much, Dave. I'm sure we would love to continue this discussion on for hours, but enough is enough. So sorry, I had to make that horrible pun. I couldn't resist. So thank you everyone for the really great contributions and the great discussion. I think it was posted in the chat that some of this will be posted online. And of course, a huge thank you, Dave, for the introduction and trying to sum up all the questions in that short amount of time. So have a good night, everyone, and thanks again.